All right, so today we need to talk about new products, and actually moving this into the third module is actually more congruent with sort of the topics that we cover. So talking about new products and then moving into branding is actually sort of beneficial. So the break that I used to have where I do new products and move into branding on module 3, it's actually kind of better that we did it after the second exam. So we're going to talk about new products. Companies need to constantly develop new products to remain competitive. Now, some marketing scholars estimate that companies need to be working on, at any given time, 25 new product ideas. And the reason they say this is that just as businesses fail, products fail. And even products that are designed by companies that are huge companies oftentimes fail. And a big example of that is the Coca-Cola Company and their launch of a brand called New Coke. So when I was a kid growing up, Coca-Cola and Pepsi were locked in this dead heat for the carbonated beverage market. And Pepsi came out with something called the Pepsi Challenge, and a lot has been written about this. But what they did is they invited people all over at malls and county fairs and state fairs to take the Pepsi Challenge and try Pepsi in a blind taste test against Coke and determine whether or not you liked Pepsi better than Coke. And in blind taste tests, people overwhelmingly who took the Pepsi Challenge liked Pepsi slightly more than they liked Coke. Now there's a reason for that. First of all, there is some evidence to suggest that they rigged the results by serving the Pepsi cold and the Coke warm, which would affect whether or not you liked it. The second thing that they found is that people actually did prefer Pepsi, but what was the challenge? Well, they gave you an ounce of Pepsi and an ounce of Coke. What's the big difference between Pepsi and Coke in terms of the taste? Pepsi is sweeter, and people for 1 ounce prefer the sweetness of Pepsi if it's only 1 ounce. They don't prefer it if they're drinking an 8-ounce can because it's just too sweet. But armed with this information, this idea, Coke launched what was called New Coke, and they did away with Coke, what is now called, they went back to branding it, and they called it Coke Classic for a long time to distinguish it between the New Coke and the original Coke. They basically relaunched their brand and they tried New Coke, and it was a miserable failure. And Coca-Cola, when we talk about brands, is one of the most valuable brands in the world today. To this day, Coca-Cola is one of the iconic brands of American industry. So companies need to constantly be coming up with ideas because a lot of times these ideas will fail. They will fall flat. Now, the product scholars, the product development scholars and strategists who say that we need to develop 25 new ideas, a lot of times what I think they're talking about is big companies. Because if you have a small company, if you're a mom and pop convenience store and gas station, you're not going to be coming up with 25 new ideas all the time. I mean, you're just going to basically be selling stuff. And so if you take what is the span of businesses, I really think that's way too many to say that, in the history, and most of you will go to work, by the way, for small to mid-sized businesses, at least at the beginning of your career. And so to say that a small or mid-sized business should constantly be developing 25 new ideas, I think is a stretch. But we get the idea that it is a market in which you have to constantly adapt. Even if you own a convenience store, you may not be developing your own products, but what you're going to stock is going to change because people's preferences change. Consumer packaged goods change. Things that have been, staples forever and ever are changing. Coke is one of the reasons, Coke is an example of ones that's having to change. People, for a long time, drank lots of beverages. What's happened broadly in that market? I used to like, Coke had a much better list of all of their brands, but these are some of the brands, and they still have some brands that you probably have not even heard of, that they still maintain and they still sell in certain parts of the country. There's one, for example, and I used to like it because they used to list a whole bunch of their brands just in columns, and that was kind of neat. There's a product called Tab. Any of you have heard of Tab? It was the original diet drink. It's god-awful. But there are some people that are still very committed to Tab, and mostly in the South. And so they still produce it. So they used to have a big list of their brands. But they've changed their website a little bit. So we'll look at some of their brands. What is happening in this market generally? If we look at the product life cycle, is Coca-Cola in the introductory stage, the maturity stage, or the growth stage, maturity stage, or the declining stage of the product, would you say? Life cycle. Do you think it's in the mature stage in the United States? What? People are still drinking it all the time. Should you be drinking it?
You shouldn't be, no.
What is one of the best products to clean your car's battery cables?
Coke.
Coke is one of the best products. Now, why does it do such a wonderful job of cleaning your car's battery cables? It's all of the acid. It's highly acidic. Think about what that's doing to your body. Not only are you dumping a whole lot of acid into your body, Coke has an enormous amount of sugar. So I think the correct answer is that Coke itself, the product, caramelized carbonated beverages, are actually on a decline in this country. Maybe not globally, but in this country they are on a decline. And why is that? Because people are realizing that drinking a lot of this stuff, first of all, if you drink 8 or 9 Cokes a day, which some people did, I drink probably 10 Diet Cokes a day. I'm trying to get better. And by the way, one of the things that's interesting is there's a lot of research that suggests that diet soft drinks, even though they don't have the sugar, they have the aspartame has the same impact on your blood sugar level. It spikes your blood sugar level if you drink it, just like having the fully leaded. The only thing you're saving is the calories by drinking the diet. So you're drinking 8 or 9 Cokes a day. How many calories is that? How many empty calories is that? What does an 8-ounce can of Coke have in terms of calories?
I think it's like 200 to 300.
Yeah.
300 calories.
If you're on a diet, what's considered a meal? 400 calories. So 1 can of Coke is half of a meal. If you're on a diet, they tell you to watch it to stay below 400 calories. 400 calories is considered a meal. And so I think that what's happening broadly is that I think Coke in the United States at least is on the decline. Look at how many of you are drinking bottled water in here instead. So Coke has had to come up with new ideas. So these are some of their brands. Obviously, there's Coke, Diet Coke, Sprite, Fanta, Coke Zero, Coke Life. This is one of their new products that they're releasing. Their brand of bottled water is Dasani, because I never thought when I was a kid growing up that you would pay more for a gallon of water than you will for gas, but you do. Every time you buy one of those, it's actually the margin cost is higher than a gallon of gas for water. So there's Dasani. Minute Maid is a Coke brand. Water, Powerade, Simply Orange, Coke Light, Fresca, Vitamin Water, Smart Water, Mellow Yellow. How many of you knew Mellow Yellow was a Coca-Cola brand? Fuse Tea, Honest Tea, Walla, Powerade. So they've got a lot of brands. So they're constantly coming up because the marketplace is changing and people's preferences are changing. People are drinking more healthy options rather than the unhealthy options of drinking Coke or Diet Coke or something like that. So we've got to constantly be innovating. Because products fail at a remarkable rate. Just like New Coke failed. So classifying products, the product part of the marketing mix, we have a variety of ways that we can classify products. We can divide them into goods and services. So we classify, we talk about services which are intangible as products. So things like life insurance is a service actually, but we call it a product or a financial product, even though it's an intangible. So we've got tangible goods, things that we can touch, taste, smell, feel, things like that. Intangibles, services, activities, intellectual property, benefits, things like that. Ideas, we can market ideas, and a lot of people do that. In the world of, for example, product development, there are people that will help you bring your product to market, and that's a completely intangible service. So the way we classify products for the consumer market is we classify them as convenience products, shopping products, specialty products, and unsought products. And the way you develop new products in each of these categories will depend on what they are. So for convenience products, consumer packaged goods, bringing those to market, how you develop that and come up with a new idea will vary as opposed to coming up with a new service idea or product. What are convenience products? These are generally things that we buy, without giving a lot of thought to them. So they're things like the Dasani water out of the Coke vending machine, or the can of Coke, or the Fritos that you buy because you're hungry. Shopping products are ones that we think about more. They generally cost more, and we generally think about them more, and we spend more time on them. Then there are specialty products. What's a specialty product? What would be a specialty product?
Would a Rolex count?
I think a Rolex would be a specialty product because it's not something that everybody has. They are customizable to a certain extent. There are different faces, different dials, things like that. And then what's an unsought product? What does it mean by unsought? These are ones that we generally don't think about until we need them.
Hangers.
Like what?
Like hangers.
Hangers. What else is an unsought product? How are you going to market that? How are you going to develop new products and things like wrecker services? Do any of you have a favorite wrecker service? Towing service that you keep on? If you have a Jaguar, maybe you have your favorite towing service. But most people don't keep their towing service on speed dial. How do they market? How do you find the tower generally? How do you find the tow truck? AAA. Yeah, you call your insurance company if you have roadside assistance, and they send out a wrecker, or AAA sends out a wrecker. And so unsought products. What's another example of unsought products? Generally speaking, although there are people who do this, they plan their own funerals. It's creepy to think about, in my opinion, but there are people who go to great lengths to plan their own funeral and what the casket they're going to have. But that's generally an unsought product. You don't generally think about buying caskets, for example, until grandma dies or something like that. So unsought products. How do you develop, so in new products, how do you develop things? Convenience products, it's a big part of the development is how are we going to get that consumer packaged good before the consumer? How are we going to get stores to buy into stocking that product and giving it shelf space? With regard to shopping products, we came up with new product design, and it takes a little bit more research and development usually on the specialty products. There's a lot of research and development. So learning management systems, for example, for higher education are a highly specialized product. Learning management systems for K-12, highly specialized products. And then unsought products. What are some of the things that are they doing now in terms of thinking about unsought products and developing new product line? What has happened in the funeral market, would you guess, for example, among your generation that's different from previous generations? That a lot of funeral homes are having to adjust to. Cremation, that's exactly it. More and more of your generation particularly, and my generation, don't want to be buried. We want to be cremated. So how do you market that? It's cheap to cremate, right? Well, what have they done? They've gone to the legislature and they've convinced the legislature that we can't just throw your body in the oven to be cremated. You have to be cremated in a casket. Why did they do that? It's an unsought product. It's so that they can sell a what? So that the funeral directors can sell a casket. As more and more people are being cremated. In business products, Purchased by organizations to provide in assisting their production of products for ultimate consumers. There are components, items that become part of the final product. For example, paint for your car, for your Ford truck, the transmission. Lots of products are not manufactured actually by the company. So for example, forever and ever and ever, and I don't know if it's still the case, but Mercedes didn't manufacture their own transmissions. They bought their transmissions from General Motors and put them into Mercedes cars. So components like that. Support products that are used to assist in the production of other products. Things like computers that you need to run your office and do billing. Installation, buildings and equipment that you need to manufacture or fabricate other things. Accessories, tools, office equipment, supplies, and then industrial services. This is becoming one of the biggest categories in our economy is industrial services. Repair, maintenance, legal, accounting, auditing services for businesses. So in a knowledge-based industry, coming up with new products in those kinds of things is where the real value is going to be. So how do you come up with new products? Well, for example, my brother is a tax attorney for Goldman Sachs. What is it that has led to a switch in the way they're marketing? What happened this last year that would be a switch? So government reform of the tax code to simplify it somewhat has led to an increase in the need for particularly high income producing individuals to figure out the tax code and the benefits. So products, we can divide them into product items, specific items, a SKU, a stock keeping unit, which is a specific, unique product itself. So if we're talking about things like candy bars, and what's happening in the candy bars industry, for example, what has Reese's done to come up with a new product? They what? They made them smaller. That's one thing that they've done. What else have they done to sort of compete with Kit Kat? They what?
They also made it into a bar.
They made it into a bar. They made Reese's into a bar. So that's a product line, a closely related group of products. So the example I would use, Microsoft Word, Excel, Publisher, what would be a specific product within that group? It would be Microsoft Word would be a specific product, or Microsoft Windows. And then a product mix are all the products or lines that are offered by an organization. So for Microsoft, it would be Microsoft Windows, Microsoft Office, their business systems, things like that. So how do we determine newness? I told you that it's important that we start thinking about developing new products, particularly if you're a big business. How do we determine what is new? When the iPhone was released, what was it, 15 years ago, the first iPhone came out, was that really new? Or was it an extension of something already known? Really? Was it the first smartphone? It wasn't actually the BlackBerry either. I'll show you the first one. The Simon. That was the first smartphone. So was the iPhone really all that new? Compared to the Simon? It's incredible to go back and look at old phones, isn't it? What about now? Is the iPhone 10, for example, much different? I have an iPhone 8. Is the 10 all that different? No. Is it really new? No. You don't think it's at all new? It's just modified. What's the big deal about the 10? Okay. The screen.
Small features.
Facial recognition. Facial recognition is new. What else is new on the, what's one of the big things that has been an issue with smartphones? What? There's no home button. I think the biggest thing that they did with the iPhone 10, I don't know if they did it with the iPhone 8, I can't remember, was how many of you have dropped your iPhone into some body of water? And had a tragedy. Is that really new? Or did somebody else come up with that first? Samsung actually came up with the waterproof before. So how new is it? When we talk about newness, it's relative to existing products. I think the iPhone was somewhat new compared to the Simon or others that came before it. What was the biggest thing that made the iPhone different from other smartphone devices at the time that it was released? What? I think it was the completely, totally, it was all the touch screen on it was the thing that was really new. Because BlackBerry, there was somewhat of a touch screen, but you still had the keypad. And so I think it was the idea that it was a completely, and actually the thing that's interesting about that is that from a business standpoint, iPhone has dominated now the business products market in terms of companies buying that. But if you think about it, what's a much better platform to actually use for a business? It's actually the BlackBerry platform was a lot better because you could actually touch type with the real keyboard. How many of you can actually touch type on an iPhone or a totally keyboard-free device? I think it's hard to do. So is it revolutionary versus a modification in terms of newness? From the consumer's perspective, generally newness involves the degree of learning that is required by the consumer in order to use the product. So when the iPhone came out, did it require a lot of different learning? Yeah, it actually did, because you had to understand how to use the keyboard and how to get it to come up and move and toggle between certain apps on it that were different than what you had on a BlackBerry or Simon or something like that. So the degree of learning, if there's a high degree of learning, is there disruptive technology from the consumer's perspective? Continuous innovation, changes in features that are not necessarily all that big and don't require a whole lot of new learning. So for example, one of the things that's happened forever and ever again, when I was a kid growing up, soap was this bar thing that you went and you got Dial soap or you got Irish Spring or something like that, and it was in a bar. Did you really have to learn anything when they started coming out with like body wash or liquid soap? There wasn't really any new learning that you had to do with that. It was just a different sort of form that went along with it. Dynamically continuous innovation, so changing minor things. So what is it that you had to learn with the iPhone 8 or the iPhone 10 that's different? The difference in the home button. Doesn't take a whole lot to get used to it, but sort of that continuous innovation. As opposed to discontinuous innovation where you have a big break. And the example I use here is police body cameras. This is a radical change in the way policing is done. One of the things that happened as a result of, it started out with dashboard cams. They were putting dashboard cams on police vehicles so that they could, and the idea was initially that they could identify, it was for the officer's safety, because what happens when officers pull people over from time to time on the interstate, particularly late at night, if they pull over somebody who may not want to be caught because they're running drugs, for example, up I-35. We have a lot of drugs, by the way, that run through Oklahoma because we have 3 major interstates that are great trafficking ways. So they sit out here at I-35 and I-44 and just wait for the drug vans to come by. And so they put these dash cams on the police cars in order to protect officer safety, because that way they could identify suspects or at least have a license plate and a good vehicle description if the suspect shot the police officer during a routine traffic stop. What the police didn't count on was that DUI perpetrators would be using those cams against the police officer. So the presumption is, at law, for example, that you are intoxicated at the .08 level, which, by the way, this has been somewhat of a controversy in legal circles, because when I first started practicing law years and years ago, it was .15 was considered to be DUI, and then it was .10, and now it's .08. There's a presumption that you are intoxicated at .08, but what started happening was defense attorneys noticed that they could subpoena the video from the dash cams, and they would show it to the jury, and it's like, oh, the guy walked the line. He managed to do the test that I can't do, stone cold sober, where you put your head back, close your eyes, touch your nose. I can't do it because I don't have good balance to begin with. I have flat feet, so I can never walk the line. But there are these videos out there, so cops had to start figuring out how to make a case, because the defense attorneys were showing these dash cam videos to the jury, and the jury was like, he walked the line. It's a presumption that you are intoxicated at .08. The presumption can be rebutted. And so police officers, that was a radical change in the technology, and something that they hadn't even thought about when they introduced them. That went from dash cams to being what? Body cams. And what do police officers now have to worry about? Body cams are both a good thing and a bad thing for the police officer, because what do? Again, it can provide valuable evidence at trial, but it can also be used against you when what? When you start shooting the perp in the back, which has happened on a number of occasions. So that is an example of a discontinuous innovation that they're having to get used to. A radical change in the way we have operated. From a legal perspective, the FTC says that you can only say something is new for 6 months up to regular distribution. Now the issue here becomes, what constitutes regular distribution? How are lots of products released? Let's think about movies. Are all movies released coast to coast in all theaters, at all places, at all times? Nope. Why not?
Some movies don't get the audience, others do.
Some movies don't get the audience that others do. Why would that be?
Because they're not blockbuster films, they're probably not getting films the same as they are going to release them in theaters than they do.
Right, and they may have more regional appeal.
Right.
One of my favorite movies growing up, because I was born in Santa Fe, New Mexico, was a movie that you all have never even heard of. But it was only released, the only place it was released was in the Southwest region. It was called the Milagro Beanfield War. And the reason that it was only released in the Southwest is because it dealt with the water wars that occur in states like New Mexico and Arizona. And so nobody in places like Florida and Louisiana, where they have lots of water, would even understand that. And so it was a limited release. And so what constitutes, if we think about this analogy to movies, what constitutes a regular distribution? Lots of products. There are places in the country that are what we call bellwether indicators. One of them is for political science and political marketing, it's Ohio. There's a saying that says, as goes Ohio, so goes the nation. They test product ideas and campaign ideas in Ohio first before they release it onto national campaigns, because the idea is that whatever Ohio does, that's a good predictor of the way the rest of the country is actually going to vote. There are other locations in terms of consumer products that are exact replicas of the nation, or microcosms of the nation as a whole, and they release those products in those markets to test them out, to see whether or not they're likely to be successful. Does that constitute, for FTC purposes, a full release? Well, you can make an argument that it doesn't. And some of those products may be released in those areas for long periods of time, far more than 6 months in order to do product testing. So, what constitutes regular distribution? From the organizational perspective, when we talk about newness, there are extensions which are low-level risk and cannibalization. Apple does this with their products. They come out with a new iPhone about every 2 years. Why is that? They cannibalize. They want you to go after the newest, biggest, and better thing. That has been somewhat successful. They actually borrowed this model of cannibalization from the automobile industry. In the automobile industry, it got to be very, very controversial and ultimately led to a lot of criticism of the automobile industry and a stop in their part in terms of when they started losing market share to other car manufacturers that weren't coming out with new models. So it was a big deal when I was growing up as a kid to look at the new models that came out. Forever and ever and ever, though, when I was a child, Mercedes didn't change their body style. For about 12 years, Mercedes didn't update their body style. And they stayed the same, and they actually captured a big part of the market share because people couldn't really tell the difference between, say, a 1979 and a 1986 Mercedes. And that became an attractive option because how often can you really buy a car? And if car companies are cannibalizing by coming out with new models all the time, the consumer gets tired of it after a while. They don't want to have to constantly try to feel like they have to keep up with the Joneses. There's a movie with Demi Moore, by the way, on marketing, viral marketing that you should probably watch called The Joneses, which sort of demonstrates this kind of cannibalization in action. It's a theoretical thing. Is there a cannibalization? The risk in cannibalizing is what's happening with Apple. For a while there, people wanted the newest and best and better thing, but now are the changes that, when I got my next iPhone, there was a big difference between, I think, like the 4 and the 5, and so I actually went out and got the new one. But now, is there that big a difference between the 8 and the 10? There's not, and I'm not really all that interested in going out and spending the money to get the 10. So cannibalization can be a risky proposition. But it's low risk generally. Is there significant innovation where you have big breaks? And then there's brand extensions. So Google has been an information company and basically a services company forever, but they've now started marketing and merging out into actual products, things like the Google Pixel and the Google phones. And we'll see how successful they are in those. Why is it that new products either succeed or fail? Most companies have failures in their new products, particularly in things like drug products. Those fail all the time, and the obvious reason for the failure in those is what? It doesn't work. There's a huge risk to a lot of those that it doesn't work. But even companies like Coke, as I've said, have failed. So what can you do to ensure that you don't have a product failure? Well, there's a protocol. You should have a well-defined target market. So before you start developing a new product, you have to think, who is going to be our target market for this product? Who is it that's going to want this product? Specify customer needs, wants, and preferences. How do you do this? Well, Apple didn't do it for a long time through market research, but now that Steve Jobs is dead, they're doing it through market research. They're finding out what the consumer wants. That's one of the reasons that they released the iPad mini. Steve said there was never going to be an iPad mini, we'll never do it, because in order to enjoy the product, you had to have a certain amount of property on the screen. Well, it turned out a lot of people didn't want a screen that big. It was too big, and so they released, as a result of research, the iPad mini. And how will the product satisfy the customer's needs, wants, and preferences? How are you going to do that? Why do products fail? An insignificant point of difference. I have iPhone 7 up here to iPhone 8 or iPhone 10. I don't think there's a big enough product difference. And as a result, what's happening to market share for Apple, broadly speaking, in the market? They're actually losing market share. Now, when you are the 800-pound gorilla on the block, you have nowhere to go but down. And so that's not necessarily surprising. But I think a lot of it is that they have cannibalized too much, and there are insignificant points of differences. No economic access to buyers. Many new consumer packaged goods never get off the ground because they will not have access. These companies that start out don't have the ability to pay the slotting fees that are required to get into things like Walmart and Target to be competitive. There's an incomplete protocol, and I use an example since we're in the Troy Smith Auditorium. I use a Sonic example here. One of my colleagues, who is a hospitality researcher, and I have done a lot of product testing for various companies. Recently, what we did a product testing for orange leaf yogurt, and we used actually students in my classes to do that product test. But my colleague started out in product development at Sonic. That's how she got interested in going on and getting her PhD, was doing product development for Sonic. Sonic has very unique protocols for their product development because they have such a limited footprint in terms of their store space that you basically have to come up with products that are combinations of things that they already have in their stores, because they don't have a lot of room to add storage space for new items. And so Kim would do all of these tests on different products, and then she would go into the board to present them, and Cliff Hudson would say, margarita cherry slush. And she, what? I think we ought to have margarita cherry slushes. We didn't test that. Well, I like margaritas and I like cherry and I like slushes, so I think we ought to do that. And they released this product. It was not actually a margarita cherry slush, I can't remember what, but it was some god-awful flavor. And she kept saying, Cliff, you're not our demographic. Who goes to Sonic? Not middle-aged men. It's not a middle-aged, he's a middle-aged lawyer. Who goes to Sonic? What's their biggest demographics? Young people and soccer moms. Margarita cherry slush didn't appeal to them, but you will find businesses and business people that project their own, I think this is a great thing, so I'm going to project that onto the market, and it's not necessarily a good thing. Lack of satisfaction of critical factors. Bad timing. You may have a great product, but if you're releasing it at the wrong time, in the middle of a recession, it's not going to go well. By the way, there are products that do really well in recessions. What are they? Alcohol. You can release any kind of alcohol in a recession and it will skyrocket to the top of the market, because that's the one thing that people will still do. They will drown their sorrows. They will self-medicate. So, but if you release a new computer in the middle of a recession, you might fail, not because it's not a great computer and it doesn't satisfy needs, but just because people do things like, oh, God, I don't need to buy that new laptop right now. I can make do with my old laptop. Poor quality. I give you an example, Microsoft Vista. Microsoft is a horrible company in my opinion. They have spent their entire existence foisting off crappy products on us. And they fix it on the back end because they're a completely product-driven company. And Vista's an example of that. It was horrible. It was a horrible product. Should never have been released. Why did they get away with it? Well, because they have 90% of the market share in the OS. Are they going to continue to have that though? No, they're not. They're not going to continue to have that level of market share as other OSs are coming out that are competing with it, because we're now less addicted to the computer and more addicted to what? This. It's one area where they're developing new operating systems. So poor quality. Lack of market attractiveness. You may have a great product. One of the things that Johnson & Johnson does is they manufacture a product for a disease called river blindness, which affects people in the subtropics and the tropics, like in South America. Well, it's a need. They have a really good product, but the people who suffer from it are these indigenous people, oftentimes living in the rainforest, and they have no money to pay for the product. Johnson & Johnson actually uses it as one of their social entrepreneurship opportunities. But it's a great product, but there's no real big market for it. The market's very small, and their ability to pay is fairly compromised. This is what happened in the early era of HIV and AIDS. The companies that came out with drugs, well, many of the people that were suffering from HIV and AIDS because they lost their jobs or they lost their health insurance were unable to pay for those innovations in the drug market at that time. Poor execution of the marketing Mix is another reason that you have market failure in new products. So having a bad advertising campaign in the marketing mix can be a reason. You can have a great product, you can have lots of market potential out there, consumers who want it. But if you don't execute the advertising portion of that, for example, well, you may fail because you fail to connect in the mind of the consumer with a need that they actually may have. So what should you do to succeed? There are 7 steps. StageGate has a formal evaluation for each stage to determine whether or not you should proceed to the next stage, or whether you should correct the product before you proceed to the next stage, or if you should just totally cut bait and run. What does cut bait and run mean? How many of you are a fisher? How many of you like to fish? God, it's amazing to me how I used to get, like, when I would say these things in my classes, like, how many of you hunt? In Oklahoma, there would be overwhelmingly a huge number of hands would go up. Now, among the millennials, there are fewer and fewer people that actually go out and fish, and there are fewer and fewer people that actually go out and hunt. So, if you fish, what does cut bait and run refer to? How many of you fish? What's cut bait and run? Fly fishermen? You know fly fishermen? My brother likes to fly fish. Well, you cast, right? You might get your fly caught as you're casting, and flies are pretty expensive if you fly fish. How long are you going to sit there and work at it before you just cut the line and move on with a new fly? So define the role for the product and how it will fit with your overall business objectives. So for example, taking Google, Google has been an information provider. They're now deciding that they're going to move into the product market and actually release things like smartphones. How well does that fit with their overall objective? One of the things that I told you at the beginning of class is that with regard to diversification of your investment portfolio in finance, we say that diversification is the closest thing that you get to a free lunch. Why is that? Why is diversification of your investment portfolio a priori, theoretically, a good thing? What does it do? This is worth 5 points for whoever can tell me what diversification does.
It lessens your risk of failure.
What type of risk? You have 5 points. If you can come up with the type of risk specifically, it's worth another 5 points. Do you know what type of risk?
That was looking at some.
Minimizes a specific type of risk, yes.
Systematic risk.
Okay. Minimizes, broadly speaking, microeconomic risk. It does not minimize macro. If the entire economy tanks, unless you're invested in whiskey, you're probably going to experience a loss in your portfolio. So it minimizes. So for example, what's happened in Oklahoma over the past 7 or 8 years, if you were completely invested in the energy sector, what happened to your stocks? Yeah, they plummeted. They've come back, by the way, because they figured out how to make it profitable at $50 a barrel as a result of fracking to make that a profitable enterprise again. But it's really good at $100 a barrel. So it minimizes microeconomic risk. With regard to diversification, I told you this, with regard to business diversification, it is less clear that business diversification is a good thing because you don't necessarily have the skill set necessary to manage that diversification. You're not actively managing those companies, and so your diversification minimizes your risk. But for businesses, they can't take that because they're actually having to actively manage those portfolios. So how does this fit within the overall objectives of your company? I think that Google launching a smartphone fits pretty well because what are they doing? Well, they're taking advantage of people are accessing Google from their what mostly now? Their smartphone, but it does involve some risk because this is not a market into which they have had experience developing products, building relationships with suppliers in China to get them manufactured and brought to market in a cheap and effective way. So you have to define how it's going to fit within your overall objectives of your company. So you have to combine the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats with your environmental scan. Step 2, develop ideas. Where do you find ideas? Sources. Well, employees are a great source. And by the way, for those of you who are going to follow my plangent advice and go and become sales majors, because you want to make a lot of money and you have the opportunity for success, salespeople are actually one of the biggest sources of new idea revenue or new idea generation for companies, because they're actually talking to the consumers on a day in and day out basis and figuring out what it is that they need. So salespeople are a big one. In terms of research and development, companies like 3M allow their employees to spend a specific and a significant percentage of their time, a specific and significant percentage of their time, engaged in research that is just of interest to them. One of the biggest examples of success is 3M's Post-its. 3M is known for adhesives. That's what they do for the most part. And so they had a guy who was doing research on adhesives. And no, it wasn't Romy and Michelle who developed Post-its. For those of you, that's a rather old movie now, but they went to their high school reunion. Have you seen that movie? Have you seen Romy and Michelle's high school reunion? And they told everybody that they developed it. Well, this guy was working in adhesives, and he found an adhesive that was not particularly adhesive. And they thought it was going to be a failure. But he noticed that if you put one piece of paper to another and use this, you could peel it off without actually tearing the product. And so that's just research and development, allowing people to experiment. 3M is one of the biggest companies. What 3M does is they provide huge incentives if something like that happens for you to develop those kinds of things. 3M will own it, but they will provide incentives to you to do those kinds of creative development. Customers and suppliers, use your sales force to listen to your customers. And then, of course, research and development labs, where you specifically define products that you're going to go out. For example, in the drug area, go out and decide that you're going to cure, or you're going to at least find a way to lessen the impact of HIV and AIDS, or cancer, or a whole host of other things. So idea generation. Then screening and evaluation. Internally, is it technically feasible? When I was in the private sector at the American Education Corporation, we had this RFP for a school district that wanted us to develop something like 150 titles. And I was going through the list, and I was like, we don't have this many titles, Jeff. I mean, we can't submit this RFP. And his response to me, our president, our CEO, was an expletive, the F word. F the numbers, live on the edge. We'll develop the products as we need them. Just submit the proposal and we'll do it. And I said, okay, we can do that, but you've got to assure me that you are going to commit our programming team to being able to come up with these products and these titles in the amount of time. So could we do it? It turns out that we did, but it was tense. Can you actually do that in the timetable that you need? External, testing the ideas on consumers to make sure that there is actually a market that wants it. So evaluating and screening, internal and external. Doing your business analysis to develop detailed financial projections and assessing the market is critical. It may be that you're going to get a great idea, but if the market is down, you may want to shelve that idea and wait till the market to pick back up. Develop prototypes, step 5, development, testing, alpha testing and beta testing to make sure that it's going to work. How do you do this? Some of these are impossible to do with regard to some types of products. So for example, you can't really develop a prototype. My brother was in Santa Fe over what is now the children's spring break. They're in Texas, so Texas is on spring break this week. We alternate with Texas, so our spring break is next week. And they deliberately planned that, actually, the colleges and universities between Texas and Oklahoma sort of plan it that way so that you don't swamp the beaches in Texas or the ski resorts in New Mexico and Colorado. And My brother was in Santa Fe with his kids over the break, and there's a brand new children's museum in Santa Fe, New Mexico that's become extremely popular. But you can't really develop a prototype of that, can you? For a children's museum. When they did the Science Museum of Oklahoma, it's very difficult to test that concept to see if there will be a market out there. So stage 5, the development can become tricky with really specialized projects like that. Market testing, exposing the product to actual customers. Types of tests, there are standard market tests where you attempt to sell it through normal distribution in a number of test markets. For example, one of them is, I told you, Ohio, also Indiana. There's a city in Indiana that's a big test market. Controlled test markets where you contract a testing program to outside services, such as Symphony IRI, to conduct the tests for you. And then a simulated test market which replicates the test in a limited degree, such as using it in shopping malls. How many of you have been to Quail Springs? There's a market research company in Quail Springs and it'll stop people and actually ask you. I've been asked, for example, to test ice cream. The Quail Springs have been asked. They have a product testing company there. Sometimes testing doesn't work and it's not feasible, as I said, for things like a museum. And then commercialization, positioning your product so that you get it in the mind of the consumer. This is, again, with regard to segmenting, targeting, and positioning, not trivial, because once you establish yourself in the mind of the consumer and you've made that connection to the consumer, it's very difficult to go back and change that. And I don't know if Dr. Morelli talked about it. My example here is always McDonald's. What is McDonald's known for? What is their position in the market? Well, they are cheap, they are fast, and they are consistent. That's the three things that come to mind when you think of McDonald's. Like if you're thinking about products, it's usually they have like really awesome fries. They have probably the best French fries in the fast food industry, in my opinion. Unlike, communist Carl Jr.'s or something like that. So McDonald's has awesome fries, but it's cheap, it's fast, it's consistent. They've started to lose a big portion of their market share, and their most profitable time of day and segment is the breakfast business. And they started losing out to things like Starbucks. So what has McDonald's started to do? McDonald's had really crappy coffee. Actually, not as crappy as Starbucks. Starbucks had really crappy coffee forever and ever and ever, and they did it deliberately because they wanted to upsell you to something that was a better or a more high-end product. So rather than having a $5 cup of breakfast roast or whatever, they would convince you, because they had crappy coffee, to buy a latte, right? Which was not $5, it's $7 or $8 for the large latte. I hate Starbucks, by the way. I've told you this before, like they're the tool of the devil. Well, Starbucks also started doing breakfast to go along with their crappy coffee. Started cutting into McDonald's breakfast market share. What has McDonald's done? They have started to reposition themselves and their brand so that now they have a McCafe and they have these specialty types of drinks, breakfast, morning coffee drinks. How successful is that going to be? If you look at McDonald's restaurants, they're re-engineering them so that they look a lot more upscale, a lot more like a Starbucks, but I'm not sure how well that positioning is going to take effect because it's really an established brand in the market and it's really hard to reposition yourself once you establish that brand. And I need to start talking about brands, but I'm out of time, so that's a good place to stop. So on Thursday, we will talk about managing products, services, and brands, and then move on to the next chapter.